when my grown stepson looked me in the eyes and whispered, "Dad, if you go home tonight, you'll lose everything, and she's already planned it," I knew the marriage I trusted had been dead long before that moment. I didn't ask him to explain right away. Not because I didn't care, but because something in his voice told me the truth was already sharp enough to cut. We were standing in a grocery store parking lot. Late evening. Cold air. Bright lights that made everything feel exposed. He wasn't dramatic. No shaking hands. No tears. Just calm fear. The kind that comes after someone has seen too much. He was 26. Old enough to carry guilt. Old enough to understand consequences. And old enough to know when silence has gone too far. He said my name again. Slower this time. "Please. Just trust me tonight." I remember thinking how strange it was that the warning came from him. Not a friend. Not a stranger. But the son of the woman I had shared my bed with for 8 years. I nodded. That was all. I didn't argue. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't rush home. Because the moment you react, you give power to the lie. Instead, I drove. Not far. Just enough to think. 8 years earlier, I had believed I was lucky. A second-chance marriage. A blended family that worked. A quiet suburban life that finally felt stable. She was charming in a careful way. Not loud. Not overly affectionate. But attentive when it mattered. And I mistook control for care. Her son, my stepson, had been polite from the start. Distant, but respectful. The kind of young man who watched more than he spoke. I thought it was shyness. Later, I would understand it was survival. That night, sitting alone in my car, I replayed small moments I had ignored for years. Her habit of speaking for me. Correcting me in front of others. Managing finances, to help. Handling paperwork, to make things easier. Isolation never arrives loudly. It shows up wearing responsibility. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No frantic messages. That silence mattered. Because if nothing was wrong, she would have been calling. I booked a cheap motel room near the highway. Nothing dramatic. Just a place to sleep. And in that quiet room, something settled inside me. Not fear. Not anger. Clarity. The next morning, I didn't go home. I went to work like everything was normal. I smiled at the receptionist, answered emails, nodded in meetings, and while everyone else talked, I listened. By noon, I had my first confirmation. A coworker casually mentioned a call from my wife, asking about my benefits package. Very detailed questions. Very specific. Too specific. That was when I understood. This wasn't emotional betrayal. It was strategic. Someone wasn't trying to hurt me. They were trying to erase me. I didn't confront her that night either. Or the next. Because revenge that shouts fails. I called my stepson instead. We met at a diner. Same parking lot where he had warned me. This time, he spoke. Slowly. Carefully. He told me about overheard phone calls. About documents he wasn't meant to see. About conversations that stopped when he entered the room. He told me she had been planning for months. A false narrative. A legal strategy. A story where I was unstable. Where I was reckless. Where I was a threat. And the most painful part? She had been practicing it on him first. Testing lies. Refining details. He looked ashamed when he said that. I told him something he needed to hear. Survival isn't betrayal. He exhaled for the first time since we sat down. That was the moment I chose my path. Not divorce papers. Not accusations. Not confrontation. Observation. If someone is building a trap, let them believe it's working. Over the next weeks, I became quieter at home. Less reactive. More agreeable. I let her think I was distracted. Overworked. Oblivious. And she believed it. People who manipulate grow careless when they think they've won. I started documenting everything. Not secretly. Openly. Through systems she assumed she controlled. Emails. Bank records. Call logs. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I just made copies. Meanwhile, she escalated. Small provocations. Subtle insults. Manufactured arguments. She needed a reaction. I gave her none. Silence frustrates liars because it gives them nothing to twist. Then came the night she finally made her move. Police at the door. A story rehearsed too well. Tears that didn't reach her eyes. But here's the part she didn't expect. I had already prepared. Not a defense. A mirror. Everything she accused me of, she had already done. And every step she planned left a trail. As they asked questions, I answered calmly. Factually. Briefly. No emotion. Truth doesn't need decoration. By morning, the tone had changed. By evening, the narrative cracked. And by the end of that week, the woman who thought she was controlling the ending realized she had been revealing herself the entire time. But this story isn't about her downfall. It's about what happens when patience outlasts cruelty. Because the real revenge didn't arrive that night. It arrived quietly. In courtrooms. In paperwork. In silence. And in the moment she finally understood that I never raised my voice. I never fought her story. I simply let the truth speak longer than her lies. The most dangerous thing about betrayal isn't the damage. It's the confidence of the person committing it. She moved through the house like someone already rehearsing her freedom. Lighter steps. Longer phone calls taken outside. Papers stacked neatly on her desk that were never there before. And still, she smiled at me. Not warmth. Assessment. She was watching to see if I noticed. I didn't. Or at least, that's what I let her believe. At night, I slept lightly. Not from fear, but from attention. The house sounded different when trust was gone. Floors creaked with intention. Drawers opened too slowly. Doors closed too carefully. One evening, I found a folder on the printer tray. She had forgotten to clear the queue. Inside were drafts of emails. Unsent. Carefully worded. Messages meant for a lawyer. They described me as unstable, unpredictable, financially irresponsible. I recognized none of the man she described. But I recognized the strategy. Character assassination always comes before asset division. I returned the folder exactly where I found it. Didn't copy it. Didn't photograph it. I didn't need to. Because now I understood the scale. That night, my stepson texted me a single sentence. She thinks tomorrow is the night. I didn't reply. Instead, I made a call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. To someone who understands systems better than emotions. A compliance consultant I once worked with. A man who had spent decades cleaning up corporate messes quietly. I told him I needed advice. Nothing more. He listened. Then said something I've never forgotten. Let her finish building it. Incomplete traps fail in court. That became my rule. The next day, she pushed harder. A manufactured argument over money. Accusations that didn't match facts. A demand that I explain myself. I didn't defend. I asked questions. Soft ones. Clarifying ones. Questions that made her repeat herself. Liars hate repetition. Truth doesn't mind it. She slipped twice. Small inconsistencies. Different timelines. Contradicting details. She didn't notice. Because she thought I was confused. That evening, she left the house dressed carefully. Not casually. I followed her. Not physically. Digitally. She had forgotten that I had once set up the home network, and that I understood traffic patterns. I watched her device connect to a location she claimed she never visited. A legal office. She stayed there 43 minutes. Enough time to finalize something. I documented nothing that night. I let it sit. The following morning, she served me breakfast. Quietly cheerful. Too cheerful. She talked about the future. Trips we might take. Things we could work through. That's when I knew. The lie was complete. People don't talk about healing when they're plotting. They talk about endings disguised as hope. Later that afternoon, my stepson came over unannounced. She froze when she saw him. Just for a second. But enough. He sat at the table. Polite. And then he did something unexpected. He apologized. To her. For being distant lately. Her shoulders relaxed. She thought he was back under control. That was her mistake. Because what he actually did was buy us time. After dinner, he slipped me a flash drive. No words. Just eye contact. That drive contained weeks of recordings. Not illegally obtained. Not hidden devices. Just conversations she forgot could be heard. Calls taken on speaker. Meetings held too close to open doors. Confidence that had grown reckless. Plans. Dates. Intent. One recording stood out. Her voice, calm and precise. Once the report is filed, he won't have room to respond. That sentence settled something inside me. Not anger. Resolve. I didn't listen to everything at once. I never do. I catalogued. Labeled. Separated emotion from evidence. Because revenge driven by emotion burns fast. And leaves nothing but ash. The next escalation came sooner than expected. She claimed I had threatened her. The accusation was delivered softly. Almost gently. She wanted me to explode. I didn't. I asked if she felt unsafe. She hesitated. That hesitation mattered. She left the room angry. Not because she felt threatened. Because I refused to play my role. That night, she slept in the guest room. Doors closed. Lights off. At midnight, she made a call. She thought I was asleep. She said my name out loud, with disgust. She said the words, "Final paperwork." And then she laughed. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as my wife. Not out of hatred. Out of accuracy. The next morning, I moved half my finances. Legally. Transparently. Documented. Not hidden. Protected. She noticed by afternoon. The explosion she had been saving. Finally came. Accusations. Threats. Tears. I stayed seated. Spoke slowly. Asked her to breathe. She screamed that I was ruining everything. And she was right. Just not in the way she thought. Because while she was building a story, I was building a record. And records don't shout. They wait. That evening, I received a notification. A formal complaint had been filed. The game had officially begun. And I smiled. Not because I enjoyed it, but because now, everything she did next would be documented by default. The trap was no longer hers alone. The accusation didn't arrive loudly. It arrived formally. An email. Stamped. Neutral language hiding sharp intent. I was instructed not to contact her directly. Advised to reflect. Warned about consequences. She sat across from me at the kitchen table when it came in. Pretended to read her phone. She didn't look surprised. That was the moment something fundamental changed. Not fear. Not panic. Authority. Because false power always relies on reaction. And I gave her none. I stood up. Took my keys. And left the house calmly. No slammed doors. No words exchanged. That silence unsettled her more than any argument ever had. By evening, the story was already moving ahead of me. Neighbors whispering. Friends suddenly distant. She had been planting seeds for months. I let them grow. The next step was predictable. A meeting. A room with neutral walls. People trained to observe behavior more than words. She spoke first. Tears appeared exactly when expected. Voice shook at the right moments. Pauses carefully placed. She described me as cold, manipulative, emotionally unstable. She even used phrases I had once said, twisted just enough. When it was my turn, I didn't defend. I acknowledged feelings. I confirmed timelines. And then I did something she hadn't prepared for. I provided documentation. Not aggressively. Not theatrically. Just calmly. Dates. Records. Third-party confirmations. No accusations. No counterstory. Just facts. The tone in the room shifted. Not toward me. Away from her. People trained to detect truth don't listen for emotion. They listen for consistency. She noticed. Her voice tightened. She added details she hadn't planned to share. That was mistake number one. After the meeting, she followed me to the hallway. Anger leaked through the performance. "You think you're smarter than me?" she hissed. I looked at her then. Really looked. And I realized something that freed me completely. She didn't want justice. She wanted control. I replied quietly, "No. I think I'm calmer." That sentence ended the power imbalance. Over the next days, pressure mounted. Calls from relatives. Friends asking concerned questions. Subtle warnings disguised as advice. I responded with consistency. Same answers. Same tone. Meanwhile, the systems did what systems always do. They compared records. They noticed contradictions. They requested clarification. Each request narrowed her options. She tried to provoke me one last time. Late-night messages. Emotional bait. I didn't respond. Silence isn't absence. It's containment. Then came the call she didn't expect. A request for her documentation. Her evidence. Her proof. She panicked. I could hear it in her voice when she called me, forgetting the rules she herself had set. "Please," she said, dropping the act, "we can fix this." That was the moment I understood the true shape of revenge. It isn't destruction. It's inevitability. I told her calmly that communication should go through the proper channels. She hung up. By the end of the week, her story collapsed under its own weight. Not dramatically. Quietly. Corrections were issued. Claims softened. Language changed. And one afternoon, I received a final message. An apology. Not sincere. Strategic. I didn't respond. Because forgiveness comes after truth, not before. That night, I sat alone in the motel room again. Same place as before. But everything felt different. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was waiting. Waiting for the next phase. Because this was only the beginning. The hook had closed. The story was ready to unfold. When I married her, I believed stability meant silence, and I didn't realize how dangerous that belief would become. She entered my life after a long period of loss. I wasn't broken. Just tired. Tired of noise. Tired of chaos disguised as passion. Tired of explaining myself to people who only listened when they wanted something. She felt different. Calm voice. Measured reactions. Eyes that studied before they spoke. I mistook observation for depth. We met through ordinary circumstances. Nothing dramatic. No sweeping romance. That should have been my first clue. People who plan rarely rush. She spoke about balance. About teamwork. About building something steady. Words that land well on men who value order. I did. She didn't rush intimacy either. She waited. That patience felt respectful. It wasn't. It was strategic. Her son, my stepson, was already grown when we married. Early 20s. Quiet. Independent. He didn't resist me. He didn't embrace me either. He watched. I thought it was resentment. Later, I would understand it was evaluation. The house we moved into was hers originally. I didn't mind. Ownership didn't define partnership to me. Trust did. I brought structure, routine, predictability. She brought atmosphere, warm dinners, organized spaces, a sense of togetherness that looked convincing from the outside. Friends admired us. They said we were solid. That word hides a lot. At first, she deferred to me on decisions. Small things. Where to invest. When to travel. How to plan. Then slowly, she began to help. She volunteered to manage finances, handle paperwork, coordinate schedules. I appreciated it. Delegation isn't weakness, when trust is mutual. But trust, once handed over, becomes leverage. I didn't notice when my access narrowed. Logins changed. Statements summarized instead of shared. She framed it as care. "You don't need to worry about that," she'd say gently. "I've got it handled." And I let her. Because nothing was obviously wrong. That's how control works best. The stepson noticed before I did. He asked casual questions. About accounts. About property. I brushed them off. I told him his mother knew what she was doing. He nodded. But he didn't look convinced. Over time, disagreements became scripted. She'd present an issue already resolved. If I questioned it, she'd appear hurt. Not angry. Hurt. That's a powerful deterrent. Men like me avoid emotional conflict when it feels unnecessary. So I stopped pushing. That was the shift. From partnership to permission. I was still respected publicly. Privately, decisions arrived already made. When I noticed, it felt too late to question without starting something. That's another trick. Make resistance look unreasonable. Years passed like that. Smooth on the surface. Managed underneath. The stepson moved in and out. Jobs. Relationships. He remained distant, but observant. He once said something that stayed with me. Some people don't argue because they already decided. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The first real fracture came quietly. A missed notification from the bank. An alert rerouted. I asked her about it. She smiled. "Oh, I updated the preferences. Too many emails were stressing you." That word again. Stress. As if awareness itself were dangerous. I agreed. That was my mistake. Because awareness is the only defense against manipulation. From that point on, everything important passed through her first. Bills. Legal notices. Insurance. I still signed things. But only what she placed in front of me. She controlled the order. And order controls outcome. The stepson withdrew further. He spent more time out of the house. Worked late. Avoided conversations when his mother was present. Once, I caught him watching her while she talked. Not with affection. With calculation. I asked him privately if something was wrong. He hesitated. Then said, "She likes winning." That was all. I didn't press. I thought he meant arguments. I didn't realize he meant people. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The way she corrected my stories in front of others. The way she framed disagreements as my forgetfulness. The way she kept records of my mistakes, but never hers. I thought she was organized. She was building a profile. By the time I felt the imbalance clearly, it had become normalized. That's how traps work. They don't snap shut suddenly. They close gradually, until movement feels dangerous. And then one night, after a quiet dinner, she said something that should have stopped me cold. People believe what's written down. She said it casually, almost joking. I smiled. I didn't understand. Not yet. But the stepson did. And when he finally warned me, it wasn't sudden. It was overdue. The change didn't announce itself. It arrived disguised as efficiency. She reorganized the house, moved things to make space, replaced routines with better ones. Better for her. I didn't resist. Men like me don't confuse leadership with domination. We step back when someone seems capable. That generosity became my blind spot. She began speaking on my behalf. To friends. To family. She's busy. He's tired. He doesn't feel like talking today. At first, it sounded considerate. Then I realized conversations were happening without me. Decisions about social events. About holidays. About commitments. I was informed, not consulted. Isolation isn't about being alone. It's about being edited out. The stepson noticed before I named it. He stopped inviting friends over. Kept conversations short when his mother entered the room. Once, I asked him why. He shrugged. Easier this way. That word again. Easier. That's what people say when resistance costs too much. She controlled narratives gently. If someone questioned her version of events, she didn't argue. She looked hurt, confused, as if she couldn't believe someone would doubt her. And people backed off. That's the power of emotional restraint when paired with credibility. Meanwhile, I began doubting my own memory. Not drastically. Just enough. Dates felt fuzzy. Details blurred. She'd correct me softly. No, that was last year. You're mixing things up again. Again. Repetition turned suggestion into belief. I laughed it off. Men are taught not to argue over small things. That training works against us when someone is keeping score. The stepson once asked me if I remembered a conversation we'd had about selling the house. I said no. He frowned. She told me you agreed. I hadn't. That night, I checked my emails. Nothing. No messages. No follow-ups. But she spoke as if agreements existed simply because she said they did. Reality was becoming negotiable. She began documenting my moods. Comments slipped into conversations. You know how he gets. He forgets things when he's stressed. They weren't accusations. They were seeds. Planted carefully. The stepson started recording things. Not secretly at first. He wrote notes. Dates. Observations. He didn't trust his memory anymore either. He told me this later. At the time, I only noticed he was quieter. The first real moment of awareness came during a family gathering. Someone asked me about a decision I didn't remember making. Before I could respond, she answered for me. And the room accepted it. I felt something then. Not anger. Displacement. As if I had stepped out of my own life for a moment. I didn't challenge her. But I watched. That night, I asked her gently why she'd answered for me. She smiled. You looked overwhelmed. Concern is the most effective mask. I believed her. Because believing her required less energy than questioning everything. That's the exhaustion manipulation relies on. The stepson tried again. He told me his mother was planning something. I dismissed it. I told him he was overthinking. I regret that. Because what I called overthinking was pattern recognition. She began separating finances under the excuse of clarity. Just so we know what belongs to whom. That phrase matters. Belongs. She started treating marriage like a merger with an exit strategy. I signed documents without reading deeply. Not recklessly. Trustingly. I had no reason to suspect. That's what betrayal depends on. The stepson moved out shortly after. He said he needed space. But he stayed close. Visited often. Watched quietly. He noticed when she asked him questions about me. Subtle ones. About my stress. My habits. My reactions. She was building a witness narrative. He gave neutral answers. Non-committal. That frustrated her. She pushed harder. One night, after an argument that appeared to come from nowhere, she said something that revealed everything. If something happened, no one would believe you. She said it calmly, as if stating a fact. I laughed awkwardly. I thought she was talking emotionally. She wasn't. That sentence wasn't a threat. It was a test. She watched my reaction closely. I brushed it off. That response convinced her I was unaware. From that moment on, the pace changed. Paperwork increased. Meetings scheduled without me. Private calls extended. The stepson started recording conversations openly. He'd leave his phone on the table. She didn't notice. Or she didn't think he'd dare. He did. Because at some point, silence stops being safety. It becomes complicity. The isolation was complete by the time I noticed. My world had narrowed. Her voice filled the gaps. And still, I told myself everything was fine. Because admitting otherwise would mean admitting I'd been managed. That's a hard truth for anyone. But especially for someone who values autonomy. The warning came late. But not too late. Because control collapses the moment it's seen clearly. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. By the time I understood what was happening, the ground had already been mapped. Not mined. Mapped. Every reaction I'd had. Every hesitation. Every mistake. Noted. Categorized. Framed. She wasn't angry with me. She was prepared for me. That distinction matters. Because anger explodes. Preparation waits. The house felt staged now. Not fake. Intentional. Rooms were cleaner. Documents filed with precision. Personal items subtly separated. Her side. My side. Lines drawn without discussion. I didn't confront her. Confrontation gives manipulators rehearsal opportunities. Instead, I began practicing stillness. I slowed my responses, lowered my voice, reduced words, not to disappear, to observe. She noticed the change, asked if I was okay, if I was feeling like myself. I told her I was tired. That answer satisfied her. Fatigue fits her narrative. The stepson became more visible during this time. He came by unexpectedly, stayed longer, asked practical questions, not about feelings, about logistics. I started answering honestly, carefully. He listened without reacting. One evening, he asked me a question that cut through everything. If she decided to end this, would you fight back? I didn't answer immediately, because I didn't know what fight meant anymore. He nodded. That told me everything. She had already told him her version of the ending, and he didn't believe it. That night, after she went to bed, he stayed behind. We sat at the table in silence for a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget. She's been practicing, he explained. Practicing stories. Practicing emotions. Practicing timing. She'd ask him hypothetical questions. How would you feel if? What would you say if? Always about me. Always framed as concern. He had started saying as little as possible. He watched her adjust. Refine. He told me she kept notes. Actual notes. Dates. Phrases. Reactions. That was the moment silence stopped being confusion. It became information. I asked him why he was telling me now. He looked down. Then said, because if I don't, I'm part of it. That sentence changed the shape of everything. I didn't ask him to choose sides. I told him he already had. By paying attention. From that point on, we coordinated without appearing to. Not secret meetings. Not whispered plans. Just alignment. If she asked him something, he answered truthfully, but minimally. If she staged a moment, we stayed calm. She grew frustrated. Control depends on predictability. And we had become unreadable. The final setup unfolded quickly. She scheduled a meeting to talk things through. Public place. Neutral territory. She wanted witnesses. I agreed. I showed up early. Sat where cameras could see clearly. She arrived late. Intentional. She wanted to destabilize me. Instead, she talked. At length. About my stress. My distance. My behavior. I listened. Didn't interrupt. When she paused, waiting for me to defend myself, I said something simple. I don't agree with that. No explanation. No argument. She pushed. Raised her voice slightly. I stayed calm. The people around us noticed. That mattered. Afterward, she was furious. At home, she accused me of embarrassing her, of making her look unreasonable. I apologized. Not because I was wrong, but because apology cost me nothing, and gave her confidence. Confidence makes people reckless. That night, she finalized her plan. The stepson saw the emails, the calls, the timing. He warned me. That was the night in the parking lot. The warning you already know. And that was when I made my decision. Not to run. Not to fight. To wait. Because when someone builds a narrative around your collapse, the strongest response is stability. The next morning, she believed everything was ready. She believed I was unaware. She believed silence meant weakness. She was wrong. And by the time she realized it, the story was already moving beyond her control. When the first official notice arrived at my workplace instead of my home, I understood she wasn't trying to end the marriage. She was trying to control the aftermath. The envelope was thin, neutral, professional. That's how danger looks when it wants cooperation. Human Resources called me in quietly. No accusations. Just concerns. Concerns about my emotional state. Concerns about domestic tension. Words chosen carefully. She had begun exporting the narrative. I listened. I answered simply. No defensiveness. No counterclaims. They weren't there to judge yet. They were there to observe. And observation cuts both ways. By lunch, she texted me. Just checking if you're okay. Concern again. Always concern. I didn't reply. That evening, she escalated. She told mutual friends she was worried. That she didn't feel safe, but didn't want to cause trouble. That phrasing spread fast. Because people like feeling trusted with partial truths. Suddenly, conversations shifted when I entered rooms. Voices lowered. Eyes searched my face. Not with fear. With expectation. They were waiting for the version of me she'd described. I didn't give it to them. That confused them. Confusion is the enemy of gossip. At home, she started documenting openly. She'd announce things out loud. I'm just noting this so I don't forget. As if narration itself made actions legitimate. I nodded. Let her write. Because documentation without context becomes evidence against the documenter. She tried provoking arguments. Small ones. About dishes. Schedules. Money. She wanted tone. Volume. Emotion. I responded with neutrality. That neutrality enraged her more than shouting ever could. The stepson stayed present. Quietly. He didn't intervene. He didn't argue. He watched. And so did she. One afternoon, she staged an incident. Dropped a glass. Sharp sound. Sudden cry. I didn't rush in. I walked. Come. Visible. Asked if she was hurt. She looked disappointed. Not relieved. That reaction told me everything. That night, she made the call. Authorities. Not an emergency call. A report. Carefully phrased. Vague. Concern-based. When they arrived, she cried softly. I stood still. Answered questions. Provided identification. Spoke clearly. They noticed the difference. Professionals always do. Before leaving, one of them looked at me and said quietly, "Stay calm." I already was. The report didn't go anywhere. But the record existed now. That was the point. The rising conflict wasn't about immediate damage. It was about accumulation. Paper cuts disguised as care. The next move targeted finances. Accounts frozen, temporarily. Clarifications requested. I responded with documentation she didn't expect me to have. Statements. Access logs. Authorization records. Every time she tightened pressure, the system pushed back harder. That frustrated her. She began slipping. Publicly. At a gathering, she contradicted herself. Twice. People noticed. Not dramatically, but enough. Doubt doesn't need fireworks. Just inconsistency. Later that night, she accused me of turning people against her. Projection is always loudest when control fades. I told her calmly that I wasn't discussing it. She laughed. Bitterly. And said something revealing. "You think this ends well for you?" I didn't answer. Because she still thought winning meant destroying me. She didn't understand yet. This wasn't a fight. It was exposure. The stepson finally spoke to her. Privately. He didn't accuse. He asked questions. About timelines. About intentions. She snapped at him. That was a mistake. Because witnesses matter, especially reluctant ones. After that, she stopped including him. That isolation cost her leverage. By the end of the week, she filed formally. Everything she'd been preparing for months. The story was aggressive, detailed, confident, and flawed. Because in her certainty, she had overreached. And systems don't punish emotion. They punish errors. The rising conflict had peaked. The next phase wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical. The filing changed her posture. She walked differently. Spoke carefully. Watched reactions instead of faces. Confidence had hardened into vigilance. That's what happens when someone realizes the outcome is no longer guaranteed. The system responded slowly. That frustrated her. She wanted momentum. Momentum hides mistakes. Instead, requests arrived. Clarifications. Supporting details. Chronology. Each question narrowed her story. Each answer forced her to commit. I responded through proper channels. Briefly. Accurately. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I didn't accuse her. I let the narrative sit next to the facts. They didn't align. That misalignment grew obvious. The stepson handed over the material he had gathered. Not dramatically. Professionally. Organized folders. Time-stamped files. Clear labels. He didn't editorialize. He let content speak. That restraint mattered. Because credibility isn't loud. It's consistent. The first sign of collapse came quietly. Her language shifted. Always became sometimes. Never became rarely. Certainty softening is the first admission of doubt. She began reaching out. Not to reconcile. To negotiate. That told me everything. Truth doesn't negotiate. I declined direct communication. That enraged her. She accused me of stonewalling. The irony was lost on her. By now, neutral observers had noticed something else. Her urgency. She emailed frequently, called repeatedly, requested updates aggressively. People trained in conflict resolution notice impatience. They notice tone. They notice when fear leaks through professionalism. Meanwhile, I continued my routine. Work, sleep, exercise. Stability is a weapon when chaos is expected. She tried reframing the narrative publicly. Posted vague messages about healing and finding strength. Subtle, but inconsistent with her filings. That contradiction mattered. Because public statements are records too. The stepson distanced himself openly now. That damaged her story more than any document. When the person closest to you doesn't support your claims, questions follow. She confronted him, accused him of betrayal. He didn't argue. He said something simple. "I won't lie." That was enough. The pressure shifted. The system began verifying her claims independently, cross-checking dates, confirming events, and every verification exposed another crack. She started blaming advisors, claimed misunderstandings, changed emphasis. That's the sound of control slipping. The most revealing moment came during a formal meeting. She spoke passionately, described fear, then contradicted her own timeline. She corrected herself, then corrected the correction. The room went quiet. No one said anything. They didn't need to. Silence does that work. Afterward, she broke composure. Anger. Frustration. She accused me openly. I didn't respond. Because now, responding would only interrupt her unraveling. By the end of that week, the tone shifted officially. From assumption to inquiry. That's the moment manipulators dread. Because inquiry doesn't accept narratives. It tests them. I was asked how I wanted to proceed. I said I wanted clarity. Nothing more. Clarity is neutral. Neutrality is power. She requested mediation, then withdrew, then requested again. Indecision exposes motive. The stepson met me one evening. He looked lighter, not relieved, resolved. He said, "She didn't think I'd stay quiet this long." I told him silence isn't passive. It's precise. The rising conflict was no longer rising. It was turning inward. And when lies turn inward, they collapse. The moment credibility breaks, it doesn't shatter. It sags. Her words began arriving slower. Her emails shorter. Her tone uncertain. That shift told me everything. Because people who believe their own story speak fluently. Doubt interrupts rhythm. She started avoiding specifics, answering questions with emotion instead of detail. That tactic works on individuals, not on systems. The system kept asking. Dates. Witnesses. Proof. Each unanswered question narrowed the field. The first official correction came quietly. A request to amend a statement. Language softened. Claims adjusted. That was the system telling her something without saying it out loud. "We don't believe this yet." She panicked. Tried to regain control publicly. She told people she was being silenced. That she was exhausted. But exhaustion without evidence looks theatrical. And people had begun noticing. Friends who once echoed her concern now hesitated. Some stopped asking questions altogether. Distance replaced sympathy. That's when she lost the crowd. Privately, she accused me of ruining her reputation. I never responded. Because reputations don't fall from silence. They fall from contradiction. The stepson's presence became symbolic. He didn't speak publicly. He didn't argue. He simply existed, calmly aligned with me. That presence contradicted everything she claimed. And contradiction is devastating to lies. The authority figures adjusted tone. Less assumption. More neutrality. They asked me how I was holding up. That question mattered. It meant I was no longer the subject. I was a participant. She noticed. She interrupted more often. Corrected others. Over-explained. That behavior marked her as defensive. One afternoon, she broke protocol. Sent an emotional message directly. Long. Rambling. Contradicted previous statements. I forwarded it without comment. That single act did more than any argument ever could. The conflict reached its moral edge there. Because at that point, the outcome was no longer about who was right. It was about who was consistent. And consistency favors patience. The final escalation came unexpectedly. She tried to withdraw key claims. Quietly. without explanation. The system didn't allow it. Once a story is entered, it must be reconciled. You don't erase contradictions. You explain them. She couldn't. That was the collapse. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just undeniable. I was informed that the case would proceed differently. Reframed. Re-evaluated. That language matters. It meant her narrative was no longer guiding the process. Mine never had to. Because truth doesn't guide. It waits. She avoided me after that. Not out of shame. Out of exposure. She knew I had never raised my voice. Never insulted her. Never fought her story. I had let it speak until it exhausted itself. That's when I understood something important. Revenge doesn't require punishment. It requires patience. Because when someone builds power on distortion, time is your ally. And by the end of that phase, time had chosen its side. When they stopped asking what she claimed and started asking how I stayed so calm, I knew the direction had already changed. That question wasn't curiosity. It was calibration. People only ask that when their assumptions have failed. The tone in meetings shifted first. Less procedural. More human. Not sympathetic. Respectful. They no longer treated me like someone being evaluated. They treated me like someone being understood. She noticed immediately. Her posture tightened. Her sentences shortened. She had lost narrative control. The system had moved past story and into pattern. Patterns don't lie. They accumulate. And hers pointed inward. I was asked to provide a timeline. Not a defense. A timeline. That request matters. Defense implies doubt. Timeline implies trust. I prepared it carefully. Not dramatically. Just dates. Events. Documents. No commentary. No emotion. When you remove emotion from a conflict, what remains is architecture. And architecture reveals intent. Her response to the timeline was immediate. Too immediate. She challenged small details aggressively. Insisted on interpretations. That eagerness betrayed fear. People confident in truth don't rush to correct. They let facts stand. The stepson was formally acknowledged. Not as a witness. As a corroborator. That distinction hurt her more than any accusation. Because corroboration implies alignment without coercion. He hadn't been persuaded. He had observed. She tried to discredit him. Called him confused. Impressionable. That failed. Because the calmest person in the room had become the most credible. And that was him. At one point, she said something she couldn't take back. He always does this. She meant me. But there was no record of this. No pattern. No history. The room went quiet. She had implied repetition where none existed. That inconsistency was noted. The turning point wasn't announced. It was felt. Requests stopped coming to her first. Clarifications came to me. She was no longer the gatekeeper. She knew it. That's when she tried something else. Softness. Apologies. Regret. Language about misunderstanding. It was too late. Once a system shifts from narrative to verification, emotion no longer negotiates outcome. I was offered options. Paths forward. I chose the slowest one. Not out of fear. Out of certainty. Speed favors those hiding. Patience favors those waiting. She began unraveling privately. Missed deadlines. Disorganized responses. Her precision, once her greatest strength, had deserted her. Because precision requires control. And control was gone. I noticed something else during that time. I was sleeping better. Not because the conflict had eased, but because I was no longer suppressing awareness. Truth stabilizes the mind. She avoided eye contact when we crossed paths. That avoidance wasn't shame. It was recognition. She knew I hadn't beaten her. I had outlasted her. And that realization weighed heavier than loss. The stepson said something that stayed with me. She doesn't know what to do when no one reacts. That was the turning point. Because reaction had been her fuel. And I had starved the fire without ever raising my voice. The next phase would be quieter. More procedural. Less emotional. Which meant it was already decided. She tried one last move. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just procedural. She requested a private meeting. Neutral location. No witnesses. I agreed. Not because I feared her. Because patience teaches timing. She arrived calm. Composed. The exact mask of control she had always worn. She started by outlining grievances. Small ones first. Then larger, more consequential issues. I listened. Not interrupting. When she paused for effect, I asked simple questions. Dates. Details. Documentation. She hesitated. Then flinched. Her words were precise, but her timeline was not. Her story relied on assumed memory, not facts. She noticed me noticing, and panic edged her voice. Just slightly. The smallest tremor matters most when control is your weapon. She tried reasoning. Twisted logic. Soft apologies interwoven with accusations. I nodded. Acknowledged hearing her. Nothing more. The stepson was present digitally. On speaker, listening quietly. A neutral observer. He didn't comment. He didn't interject. But she felt his presence. It made her cautious. Made her reconsider every word. At one point, she asked if I had proof of her inconsistencies. I said calmly, I have records. Nothing more. Her lips tightened. Eyes darted. A moment of realization passed faster than words could express. She had prepared for conflict, but not for calm. Not for patience. Not for documentation. Not for consistency. That meeting ended quietly. No raised voices. No dramatic exits. She left, believing she had maneuvered me into concession. By the time she realized she hadn't, the process had already shifted entirely. Official reviews began cross-referencing events with my records. Statements matched timelines. Communication logs confirmed what was said and when. Her narrative, once polished, rehearsed, believable, began to fracture. She made frantic calls. Requested clarification. Tried to add details after the fact. Those attempts only highlighted inconsistency. Procedures can't be fooled by emotion. The stepson handed me another folder. He had been collecting her own notes. Emails. Messages. Audio recordings. Everything neatly labeled. I didn't need to act. I simply held the information. Prepared for the moment it would be required. Because turning points aren't explosive. They are inevitable. She realized it later that week. I could see it in the small ways. A hesitant question. A soft sigh. A glance that lingered too long. Control had shifted. Authority, once assumed, now recognized my steadiness. And she knew it. By the end of this segment, the conflict was no longer hers to define. Her last strategy had failed quietly, invisibly. The system had moved beyond narrative. The turning point had arrived. The moment came quietly. Not in an argument. Not in a confrontation. But in a meeting room filled with neutral observers. She arrived expecting to guide the narrative. To shape outcomes. To control perception. She failed immediately. Because I had already done the work she refused to see. Meticulous records. Accurate timelines. Corroborating statements. Unwavering calm. She tried a soft approach. A tearful appeal. An attempt to reclaim moral high ground. I responded with a single, measured sentence. Everything will be reviewed as it happened. That sentence ended her momentum. She flinched. Hesitated. Then overcompensated, explaining more than required. correcting herself mid-sentence, adding justifications where none were needed. Observers noticed, not dramatically, but enough to sense the shift. Her credibility crumbled quietly, like frost under sunlight, step by step, imperceptibly, until the foundation of her story became unstable. The stepson watched, still quiet, still aligned, present only by his observant presence. She realized, too late, that her strategy relied on reaction. Reaction she could manipulate. But I did not react. That absence of reaction unmade her plan. Her power evaporated. When she left the room, she was visibly unsettled. Not with anger. Not with defeat. With the understanding that she had misjudged patience as weakness. The official process began to reflect the reality she had tried to distort. Records aligned. Statements corroborated. Her inconsistencies became evidence, not oversight. The room no longer listened for her emotion. They listened for facts. And facts never lie. Her final attempts to negotiate collapsed. Requests denied. Corrections scrutinized. Her own network of influence became irrelevant. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply continued with routine, work, documentation, silence. The turning point was complete. Not with drama. Not with revenge in anger. But with quiet, undeniable alignment of truth. By the time she realized she had lost, there was nothing left to contest. The stepson said quietly later, "She didn't know how to handle calm." I nodded. Patience had been the only strategy required. And in that silence, justice began to unfold, precise, inevitable, and moral. The reversal wasn't explosive. It wasn't theatrical. It was final. And the lesson was clear. When someone builds power on distortion and control, patience and consistency are stronger than anger or force. When the first official notice arrived confirming the inconsistencies in her statements, I didn't celebrate. I simply read it, filed it, and moved forward. Resolution rarely demands emotion. It works quietly, with inevitability. The process didn't happen overnight. Days passed. Meetings occurred. Questions were asked. Every request revealed the same pattern. Facts aligned with truth. Her narrative faltered. She began avoiding public appearances. Friends no longer asked her opinion on events. Subtle distance replaced influence. People realized her certainty had no foundation. I maintained the same routine. Work. Meetings. Simple, unremarkable life. Because when outcomes are inevitable, patience is enough. The stepson stayed close, observing discreetly. He never interfered publicly. But his presence carried weight. Her attempts to sway him failed. And that failure weakened her influence in ways she could neither measure nor control. She tried to rebuild credibility. Soft apologies. Explanations. Social media statements about misunderstandings. None worked. Consistency, calm, and evidence had already replaced narrative. Her words no longer carried authority. Small victories accumulated quietly. Banks restored access. Documents verified. Responsibilities returned to proper channels. The system operated on facts, not manipulation. And facts always favor preparation over performance. The first tangible resolution came when she attempted to revise a claim formally. It was denied. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Simply, firmly, officially. That denial sent the message without spectacle. Control had shifted. Justice didn't require vengeance. It required integrity. Friends who had doubted me slowly realigned. They observed behavior, not stories. They recognized the calm authority I had maintained throughout. She noticed. Frustration became quiet. I could see her adjusting her tone, avoiding confrontation, rehearsing interactions that would no longer sway anyone.